Hello and welcome to my mini tutorial on launch planning and proper ascent trajectory. In the last video where I left off, I was designing this craft, which I just called Test Mark 1 before, but I've renamed to Full Moon Mark 1 because this will completely do a moon landing and return if you pilot this reasonably efficiently. So I'm going to go and launch right now, and I'm going to demonstrate to you what you're going to want to do roughly when trying to do an efficient launch. Okay, so here we are. If you're not familiar with all the information that's presented to you in the launch area, then I should quickly cover that. This says 86 meters here because that seems to be my altitude above sea level. It's important to know because if you think that it's actually the level that your rockets, the very bottom of your ship is above the ground, then you're going to have a bad time because you are going to crash into the ground thinking that you're a little bit higher than you actually are. That is important, especially if you're doing any sort of landing in a dark area, such as maybe the dark side of the moon or something like that, or if you don't have sufficient lighting. So that could be a problem. There's the atmosphere indicator here, which basically shows you the thickness of the atmosphere at the current altitude that you're at. That's useful for knowing whether, firstly, it's useful for knowing whether how extreme your terminal velocity is going to be at a certain level. When you're designing your engines, you're most likely going to want to balance everything such that you don't have so much thrust that you're actually pressing against the terminal velocity at whatever altitude you're at. You're probably most likely going to want to stay slightly under your terminal velocity, but you're also not going to want to have so little thrust that you're maxing out your throttle is not even going to get you up into the air quickly enough. Normally what I design everything to do is I like to have it so that I have enough thrust that I will just about hit my terminal velocity at pretty much every point in my ascent trajectory, and that will mean that I, at 100% thrust, have not put too much engine, and so I'm not carrying too much mass um, in engine form up with me. I'm basically just taking the very minimum amount of craft and engine and fuel that I need to actually get to where I want to go. So most likely what you're going to want to do is either at launch or immediately after launch, you're going to want to press the T key because that's going to activate your SAS module, which is the thing up very near the top that's slightly below the command pod and the separator. The SAS module, in this case this is an advanced SAS module, what it does basically is it will allow you to lock in a direction that you're going to face. Normally when you're in the atmosphere you don't have a problem with this because whatever direction your ship is flying in, it's pretty much going to center you because the atmosphere is going to push you in that direction because that's where there's the least wind resistance. But when you're out in space there's no wind, so if you rotate in a certain direction you're just going to keep rotating. So what the advanced SAS will do is if you activate it, it will try its best to cause you to rotate in the opposite direction of any movement that you're doing, and it will basically lock you in at a certain heading. And that's extremely useful for when you're trying to point very precisely and stay very precisely while you do some sort of corrective burn or some sort of burn to completely change what orbit you're in and launch yourself into a different trajectory entirely. So we're going to go ahead. Another thing you might want to do when you're launching is double check that your staging is correct. If it's not, then you're going to most likely screw up or blow up or whatever else. So it's often good to do a double check with that. Ideally you'd want to make sure it's correct before you launch, but sometimes that doesn't always happen. So to quickly cover the rest of the interface here, this resource tab, it starts minimized. I like to click it to show it at all times. Many people in videos I've noticed don't actually do that, but I like to make sure, I like to know at all times pretty much what percentage of fuel I have left of the different resource types. There's also the R key, which activates your RCS, which causes your thrusters to go. If you have the SAS enabled, then they will constantly be blowing you back and forth while you're on the surface like this, and you're going to be wasting monopropellant fuel. And so you probably want to either turn off T for turning the SAS off, or you probably want to hit R to turn the RCS off. Excuse me. So that actually is not very useful when you're on the surface because the atmosphere is pretty thick and just blowing RCS fuel or monopropellant is not really going to do much to adjust the direction that you're heading in, but when you're out in space, it's actually going to have a pretty large effect, especially when all you have left is the upper stage. So for now, we don't really want to use that, so we've turned it off. So your flying controls are going to be WSAD, QE for clockwise and counterclockwise rotation, and shift to throttle up and control to throttle down. You'll see the throttle indicator here is moving up when I throttle up. You want to make sure you throttle up before you launch, because otherwise these launch clamps will let go and you'll just crash into the launch pad. There's this G-force indicator on the side here, which really doesn't matter because your pilots pretty much can't die, at least in this version of the game and all the current versions that are there. But it is somewhat useful to know how much G-force you're undergoing. Then there's the roll, yaw, and pitch indicators here. This is the staging view. This is the only view where actually when you press spacebar you can actually cause a stage to fire. When you're in docking mode, you'll see controls that are slightly different, and things will actually behave differently according to if you have this control mode in ROT or UN. And I'm not really going to get into explaining how they work right now. That's kind of a more advanced thing. It's really useful for docking, but not all that useful for much else. And then there's also orbit mode. The orbit map here basically lets you see everything around the planet and the immediate area surrounding everything that you've got going on here. It's useful for planning what's going on in terms of where things are and where you want to go. But at the moment it's not actually that useful because we're actually on the surface, so we can't examine our current trajectory and figure out what we want to do to modify our trajectory so that we get to where we want to go, because we don't have a trajectory right now. We're still on the surface. However, you will notice this nav ball here is visible both in the staging view and in the map view. And this is extremely useful. You can actually do all of your navigation from here entirely if you want to. It's actually quite impossible to do it from inside the craft, because if you go in here and you right click so that you go into sort of look around mode, you will basically notice that there's just a tiny little window in this craft and it's not really very useful for navigating with. However, you will see that there's all these little controls in here, and you actually could pilot the craft from in here if you wanted to, because as I said, the nav ball is actually here, and the nav ball is actually enough to pretty much do whatever you want, in combination with all these other altimeters and speed indicators and all that sort of thing. One thing that's neat is when you're throttling up and throttling down, you actually see the little control here move. I'm going to go out of the craft though. I think you have to press V, yep, to change your camera mode to go back out of the craft. So what you're going to want to do, the path that you're going to want to go on is, since the planet is actually rotating around, it's rotating around its axis, and it's also rotating around the sun, and I think theirs are done basically in the same kind of direction. The planet itself will rotate, and you're going to want to take advantage of that rotation, because immediately when you launch, it's going to start, since the atmosphere is turning, it's going to sort of take you with it, and you're going to end up in a sort of arced trajectory. You're going to not want to fight that. You're probably going to want to go with it, because that means it's basically adding to your velocity rather than subtracting. So you will end up wanting to go approximately where the 90 is on the nav ball. That will actually put you at a 45-degree angle in terms of if you're thinking about how it would look in a flight situation with a regular aircraft. So we're going to go and try that now. So I've throttled up and I'm ready to go, and my docking clamps are in the same stage as my rocket engines, so when I hit space I will actually go. And that's probably what I want to do. So I'm going to hit T to lock in my direction that I'm going into to make sure that I don't fly all over the place. And for the first couple thousand meters you are going to just pretty much want to go vertically. You're not going to want to do anything crazy. When you get up to about 10,000 meters, most likely at about that point is when you're going to want to actually start doing your gravity turn and start thinking about circularizing your orbit. You'll see here that the fuel tanks are not drawing themselves at the same rate as each other. The one in the center, you can actually hover over the different parts in the staging controls, and it will highlight which part is which for clearing up what's going on. You'll see that the center one seems to have more fuel than the others. The reason for that is that it's drawing fuel out of the outside tanks, care of the fuel lines that I placed, and using it to fuel the inner tank. You can actually right click on the tanks and you can see what's going on, and you can actually see that both of the middle tanks, the fuel is still there, and all the upper stage, of course, the fuel is still there. However, the outer tanks, they are quickly running out of fuel. You can actually hold Alt and you can click one tank and then click another, and you can actually do a transfer out or in to or from any tank. You don't normally need to do that. That's something you might consider doing when you're out in space or when you're trying to do a fueling, when you've docked with a fueling station or something like that. But we don't actually use that in this video because there's no docking in the demo. I'm getting close to about 10,000 feet, so I'm going to take off T, and I'm going to start turning myself to do my gravity turn. Normally you would not want to do too steep of a turn, so what you'd want to do is make sure that the little indicator on the nav ball here, this yellow indicator, which is your prograde vector indicator, you'd want to make sure that you're maybe leading it a little bit, and you kind of wait for it to catch up to you before doing any more of an adjustment. Another thing that you're going to notice is that I'm kind of rotating around at weird angles, and that is because I don't have the SAS on, so things will just kind of cause that. Now I pressed the spacebar to stage again. I fired my external stage. Now I'm just on the middle rocket, and you'll actually see that my velocity is not appreciably decreasing. It's actually slightly increasing. It's not increasing at the same rate that it was before, but at least it's not massively decreasing. So I'm going to lock in at about a 45-degree angle upward, which corresponds with the 90 in the nav ball, and I'm going to go back to orbit map so you can see. So I've got a bit of a trajectory going on right now, and it looks like I'm not actually gaining much height at the top of my trajectory. I'm mostly just gaining distance that I'm going to go across the surface on. What you're going to want to do for an efficient orbit is, as I said before, you're going to want to start your turn at about 10,000. When you're really getting going, you're going to want to make sure that you max out at about 70,000 because that is the actual height of the atmosphere. You're most likely going to want to stay at this 45-degree angle, which is at about the 90 indicator for a while. But once you start getting up to about 50 or 60,000 or whatever, you're going to want to press T to turn off your SAS, and you're going to want to start correcting. You're going to want to burn more towards the horizon. So you see this part where it says 90 yet again here, where it has the difference between the brown and the blue is that the brown area, if my current indicator is showing that I'm in brown territory, then I'm actually nose down. I'm pointing towards the planet, which means I'm going to be decreasing my actual apex or my apoapsis of my trajectory. That would actually start decreasing, whereas we want to slightly increase it. Now the other thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to make sure that you're at your velocity where you are completely at a wide enough trajectory that you're completely engulfing the planet with your trajectory, and that your other side of your trajectory is actually sticking out the other side of the planet. And you're going to want to do that at about the point where you are at about 70,000 meters, because that's where the atmosphere ends. And so if you're slightly above 70,000 meters, the atmosphere is not going to be slowly dragging you back into the planet, decreasing your orbital altitude. So as you can see, even though we're actually going quite along the horizon here, we're pretty much going quite level with the horizon, not perfectly, but pretty close. We still seem to be gaining max altitude, and the reason for that is that we're kind of behind the peak of our trajectory. So when we're behind it, we're still kind of pushing it up when we're going forward. Also, we're actually kind of curving around the planet, and as we curve, we're still pointing in the same direction we were pointing before, but now we're further ahead, and so the planet seems to actually sort of be rotating under us. So every once in a while, you're going to have to do an adjustment to factor that in. So it looks like now I'm going to actually start seeing the periapsis indicator show up soon, and I'm going to cut my velocity because I don't want to get too far away with my apoapsis. So I'm actually coasting right now. I'm slightly in the atmosphere still, so I am kind of losing maximum altitude. My apoapsis is actually going to be slowly decreasing a bit because I'm still slightly in the influence of the atmosphere. If I go back into my staging view, you'll see that the indicator shows at the top of the atmosphere there, it shows that I have a little bit of atmosphere left. What I'm going to want to do is I actually cut my engine there because I wanted to make sure that the periapsis indicator and the apoapsis indicator are not too misaligned with each other. Ideally, what you're going to want to get in a stable orbit is you'd want to have your apoapsis and your periapsis both at 70,000. That's the sort of apogee and perigee. They call it apoapsis and periapsis in this game because that's just actually apparently the proper terminology. So what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to wait until I'm at my apoapsis or near it before I do any more burning in the prograde direction. When I am at the apoapsis and I burn in the prograde direction, that's going to act to not change my apoapsis really, but it's going to increase my periapsis, and it's going to do that in about the most efficient manner you can do it. So I'm just going to I'm going to time accelerate forward, and I'm going to pretty much wait until I approach my apoapsis. And when I do that, then I can do my burn to circularize my orbit. Another thing that you'll notice is that the maximum speed that you can time accelerate at is dependent on your current altitude, and now that I'm surpassing 70,000 meters here, I'm out of the atmosphere. So you'll notice that I have more options unlocked after I leave the atmosphere. So you actually want to end your time acceleration and then start it up again, because you'll actually get to go a little bit faster when you've canceled it and restarted it again once you're above the atmosphere. Okay, so now I'm pretty close to my apoapsis. I'm a few seconds away. I'm going to go back into staging view so you can sort of see what's going on in terms of where I'm pointing relative to the planet. You'll see that I'm pointing up now, whereas before I was not. I was pointing sort of along the horizon. That's where the nav ball is useful. I can't actually see where the heck I'm going right now because I'm on the dark side of the planet, but I can tell where my indicators are in the nav ball. That will actually tell me what direction I'm flying in. So I'm going to line myself up with the prograde vector, and I'm going to burn a little bit on the prograde vector. But when I do that, I'm probably going to want to be in orbit mode because I want to know how long I want to do my burn for, and I want to make sure that I don't let the apoapsis get too far away from me. I'm actually retreating away from it now. When you're actually past the apoapsis, you're going to normally want to burn a bit up, slightly above the horizon, but it doesn't matter because our apoapsis is really higher than we need it to be anyways. So I'm burning at a pretty low sort of altitude here, and there we go. Yeah, the periapsis is above 70,000, so we are now in a stable orbit. The apoapsis retreated a bit behind us because we weren't burning. What was it? We weren't burning below the horizon. We were burning slightly above it. If we were to burn slightly above it, the apoapsis I think would slowly start advancing in front of us. Actually, you might normally when you're burning, you most likely want to have the apoapsis stay under you the whole time. So if you find that it's going forward on you, then you can pull up a bit, and if you find that it's going behind you, then you can pull down a bit in terms of the horizon. So I actually could have been a little bit below the horizon, and I probably would have been fine. But either way, we are now in a safe orbit, and we have the periapsis and apoapsis both such that there's no point in our orbit where we are actually sinking back in the atmosphere, and so we're safe. If we did nothing, we would stay here indefinitely. So we're now in orbit, and that was a fairly efficient orbital burn. You'll notice that I still have 412 fuel. That doesn't seem like very much, but considering that we don't have to carry the huge weight of the outer stages anymore, and in fact this middle stage is almost emptied, so I would actually shortly be ejecting this middle stage and I'd just be on my upper stage. This small amount of fuel will actually get us quite a ways. You'd be surprised at how far you can get on just a little bit of fuel. In fact, it's so much fuel that I actually have enough that I would be able to get to the moon and land on it, and I would actually be able to take off from the moon and get back as long as I actually plan my maneuvers efficiently. So that's it for demonstrating how to get into orbit. See you later.